Hey, Karen, thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. We've had you on before. Actually, it was 11 months ago. And we were talking about your two films back then, Licensed to Parent and Last House Standing. And what a fantastic interview. Like, that was fantastic. And normally I don't get two people back on twice. But I tell you what, this Hurricane Ian, when we talked about Last House Standing, the whole premise of that was that one house was left standing on Mexico Beach after a hurricane went through, and you and I had a very in-depth conversation about what it takes to build a solid house, or housing building regulations and all that kind of stuff. As we know, though, Hurricane Ian came through because it's guaranteed. Hurricanes are going to come through Florida and the Caribbean, we call it. You call it Caribbean. And you live in Tampa. It was headed straight for Tampa, and I reckon you dodged a bullet. What do you think?
There's no question. They were talking for days about how it was going to hit Tampa directly, and in what's called a doomsday scenario. So if a storm comes in out of the southwest and pushes up into this area, the water is really shallow. So as that push of water comes in, there's no place for it to go. So it ends up on the land, and you have an incredibly high storm surge.
Wow.
In my neighborhood in South Tampa, the historical storm surge is listed as 10 feet. They were saying from this storm, as it was getting closer, it could be 10 to 15 feet. And
Wow.
areas south of us actually had 15 feet. So in my film, we interviewed people from Tampa. We talked about the Hurricane Phoenix scenario where they studied how bad it would be here, and that is exactly what was headed our way. So I started making videos about getting ready and all this stuff, how we were going to handle it, how we were going to ride it out. And then the storm turned, and came in on shore about 2 hours south of here, in an area that we vacation at every year, Sanibel Island. We go to Naples a lot, two of the most incredible areas that I've ever been to. And to give you an idea of what the difference is, this sums it up. My day today, I woke up this morning, went and played pickleball, went and bought some plants, repotted them in front of my house. If the storm had hit here, I might not even have a house that's standing. I might be dealing with insurance companies. I might be dealing with, where's my family going to live? So a slight swing of the pendulum means the difference between going on with your life or rebuilding your life.
Wow. And I've seen pictures and videos of Sanibel Island, and it's just decimated. And also the bridge was taken out. And down at, for those who don't know, down the Florida Keys, it's just a series of bridges all the way down, joining all these islands together. And here you've got a bridge completely taken out. And so all those people were completely stranded. And I mean, I know there were rescue efforts, but you can't rescue people in the middle of a hurricane, and I can't even imagine it, to be honest. I think that we've just had floods here. All of Victoria, where I live, it's just been decimated by floods, and we were the only area for once. And I'm not laughing about this, but it's usually us. We're the area that usually cops all that, but there's 8 to 10 foot, waters all around the place. And what do you do with water? Like, we have fires as well, and fires just wipe you out, and that's all there is to it. Water gets into everything, and then you got the filth of the sanitation problems. You've got human waste and animal waste all floating in this water. It's coming through your house. I don't know. Tell me more. I don't know. What do we want to talk about? Because
Well, I can give you an example. When I lived in Detroit, Michigan years ago, we have what's known as sump pumps in our basements there, and that keeps water from getting into your basement. Well, the power went out, the sump pump stopped working, and we got about a foot of water in our basement. That cost us about $20,000 in repairs. You have to replace the drywall halfway up the wall. We had carpeting down there. A lot of our valuables that we were storing, we stupidly stored in the basement. And that was just from the power going out with the sump pump. Now imagine the ocean rushing into your neighborhood. The water is now contaminated with debris, sadly, dead bodies, dead fish, all kinds of dead wildlife, refrigerators, cars, batteries that are corroded. The water down there is supposed to be really bad. And this area was what I consider paradise. I mean, I was hoping to live down in that area in a few years when my kids graduated. I just think it's incredible. And it's so heartbreaking to see a paradise destroyed. And this is what kind of throws me off as a filmmaker with The Last House Standing is I don't know what they could have done about the storm surge. I'm waiting to hear how the experts analyze all this. Some houses survived. Newer houses had a better chance of surviving. But I think they all got some water in them because if you take 15 feet of water blowing in off the ocean, there's waves on top of the 15 feet. I think water got into a lot of things there, and we'll know the stories as they come out. You know, we're still hearing things from Mexico Beach, and it's been several years. So that's what's going to be interesting to see. What survived, what didn't, what could we have done differently? Because it just made me personally throw up my arms and go, wow, maybe there's nothing I can do. Maybe this is all a crapshoot of luck. You hope it doesn't happen. So you have insurance, you have a plan for what you would do if the disaster hit. And it's a plan that you made before the disaster was headed your way. You make it on a sunny day when there's nothing going on. So that's what kind of thrown me off. You know, I love Florida. This is my home, but this really stunned me.
Maybe it's to the degree of the hurricane, you know, because this one's the worst, I think, in 100 years or something like that. I can't remember what I read, but
I don't know. Maybe all things. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Karen. But I think all things being equal, there's certain aspects of it that were worse. And maybe when damage is totaled up, it'll be worse. But you remember the Hurricane Michael in my film was a Category 5. This was only a Category 4, but it's such a little small difference in the winds and the direction that it was coming in, and the storm surge just was the worst possible scenario for that area. If you drew up a plan and said, this is the worst thing that could happen to you guys, that's what happened.
So when you're saying southwest, you know, but it's coming in on that angle, I saw a map on, you know, I Googled it all because, you know, I've got quite a few of you friends that live in Tampa, and I was watching it and looking at the map, and there was a map of all of the past hurricanes. You know, it was like hurricane paths, you know, of all these ones that have come up from Cuba and all that. And they all seem to come from the southwest, like, or was I just looking at a map that was just specifically showing southwest?
Okay, so the path is coming straight up the coast of Florida, and then it turned to go inland. So it's going south to north, and then it turns, and it's that push of water as it turns, and the winds with the eye of the in the center of the storm that drove all that water in there. So that's what they were looking at for Tampa. It was supposed to go, you know, a couple hundred miles north of there. I think probably less than a couple hundred miles. And that was supposed to happen here. And so we got a glimpse of our future. There's never going to be a better blueprint that Tampa can study of how bad it can be here. And to give you an idea, they updated the statistics that we had in the film. And they said that if a Category 5 hurricane hit Tampa from that direction, 70% of the buildings in St. Petersburg, the office buildings, would be destroyed. 60% in Tampa. $400 billion worth of damage. I mean, this place would be shut down, and there's bridges everywhere here. Yeah. There's bridges from here to St. Pete that connect things. There's a bridge to an island where one of our biggest hospitals is right up the street from us, you know, 10 minutes away. Why they put a hospital on an island in a bay with a bridge is just mind-boggling to me. But I think it exposed a lot of things, and it'll be interesting to see how people react and what they do. I don't know how much they can do other than tighten the bolts on everything and make sure your home is as resilient as possible. But I think some people have Brock Long, the former FEMA director, said hurricane amnesia. You know, the storm misses you. It's like you're driving down the street and you almost get in a car accident and you have your heart's racing. You go, God, I'm never going to look at my phone again while I'm driving. And then 2 blocks later, you're looking at your phone again. Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen with a lot of people.
Wow. And we're recording this in late November, late October, and I'm going to be putting this up the week it comes up in 2 weeks' time. I'm going to be in Tampa, and so you know.
Nice. I hope you'll look me up.
I know we should do that. I went over there a few years ago, and you know, it's the same thing as what you're talking about. You take it for granted. You look at it, you know, as it was coming into Tampa, and I was worried about it. I was thinking, Isn't it funny? A few years ago, I was standing there and I just took it all for granted, and St. Petersburg, we're driving around and really just enjoying everything. And I was imagining, wow, that might not have been there. And then I was thinking as it was coming in, this might not be there. When I go there, is there even going to be a place to go? So I'm going to look at it in a very, very different light, in a much more grateful light. But yes, we will. I will look you up. What about Fort Myers, like just down south a little bit more? That was completely decimated too, wasn't it?
Yeah, Fort Myers is right next to Sanibel. It's all in the same area, and Fort Myers Beach had it really bad. Fort Myers had a lot of damage as well, and that's a really pretty little city, right by the water. You kind of have to drive through there on your way to Sanibel, and we stopped there a few times and had lunch and walked around and seen the boats and everything, and it just really is a spectacular place where people go and retire. And in my last podcast, I had Brock Long on, and he was talking about a lot of interesting things about a lot of people move down to Florida and they retire. And so they buy a house and they go, well, I don't need to keep an insurance policy on it. I can save money. And that's their nest egg. That's everything they have. And when it gets destroyed, he said, the most you're going to get out of FEMA, and I think that's a loan if they give you anything, is $30,000 if you
Wow.
cut the line and get that. So people can literally get wiped out. And he said most people, there's a book that he had seen or a statistic that most people who lose their house in a situation like that, it's something they never recover from if they don't have insurance. It's a life altering thing. So I think a lot of people, we're going to hear a lot of sad stories over the next, coming years. I haven't even got an accurate tally of how many people lost their lives.
Yeah.
Storm surge is one of the biggest killers in hurricanes. A lot of people die afterwards from generators and trying to go someplace and have an accident. But storm surge is a killer. And one of the things Brock said is we don't hear a lot of stories about storm surge because people don't live to tell about it. Well, there are some people that lived this time to tell about it, and we're going to hear some stories of just how horrible it was that they stuck it out and tried to ride out the storm.
It's when you're talking about that they lose their house and they lose everything, that life altering, it's life devastating, because it's the stress that comes with that causes cancer. It causes heart attacks, it causes strokes. It's not just the living with the I don't have a home, and that's disastrous in itself. It's the health impacts as well that come in. Your life's never the same. And I saw a picture of I'll say the property of a multi-million-dollar mansion on the beach, and all that was left was the pool. So the pool was good enough to hold, but so when you're talking about building a nest egg, or like building a house as a nest egg, and this multi-million-dollar house on the beach, people probably, I don't understand that. And I'm not going to criticize other people's lifestyles, but if you're going to spend multi-million-dollars to build a house that could be blown down, I don't get the point of that. I'd rather spend $500,000 and build a house with good solid foundations that won't blow down. I don't know.
Well, you hope somebody that builds a house like that at least has the wealth to afford a disaster like that. But I've interviewed wealthy people who lost their homes in disasters, and they're still incredibly affected by it. It's not just because you have more doesn't mean it's not a horrible loss for you.
Yeah.
But it is tragic, the people that have very little and lose and then have to take out loans because you still have to pay off the mortgage of your existing house. So the path to recovery might be a little better for wealthy people. Maybe it's a lot better, but it's tragic for everybody. And yeah, you have to wonder that. Maybe we're building in places where we shouldn't be living. Maybe we're making choices. One of the things Brock said to me was, George, maybe you should reevaluate living in Tampa. Maybe the cost of living in paradise is too high.
Yeah.
And that did get me thinking. Unfortunately, there's no place else I would rather live than here. But it certainly has me thinking, is this smart? Am I risking everything? Do I want to be spending 10 years rebuilding my life because the entire community is wiped out? Those are conversations people should be having. I can tell you, I would bet everything I have that it's not going to change anything. The climate change people are just going to point and go, look what happens, climate change, climate change, climate change. And I think it's an important conversation to have. It's not the right time to have it. I don't think it wouldn't have stopped this. It's not going to stop the ones for the next 5 or 10 years. If we all started driving electric cars tomorrow, we're still going to have hurricanes, and the cars are still going to blow up or catch fire when they get salt water in them, which happened in a few occasions. They think that's how one of the houses burned down. So a lot of things have to happen after this, but what's going to change? How are people going to do something different to see this? If you could view this and see what we dodged and do nothing different going forward, you truly are just saying, you know what happens, happens. I'm going to live my life, and whatever happens, happens. I don't know that I'm that person.
That's really hard. It's a fine line, isn't it, between the two types of thought processes? One, I'm just going to enjoy my life and just let the stress go and just see what happens. But then there's which is great and like a bit more stress-free, but in a way avoiding the truth. And then there's the other one going, well, hang on a minute, I don't want this to happen again, so I'm going to put all of this in place, which is quite stressful, but it could keep you safe. So I can see that under a stressful situation, which is like now, people are kind of just going one or the other, throwing my hands up in the air and saying, well, you know what, I can't do anything about it. I can't live the rest of my life stressed. And then there's going to be the other side that are just absolutely scrambling. What can I do? What can I do? What can I do?
Here's the thing. If you said you were going to I'm leaving, I don't want to deal with this anymore, then you have to say, where would I go?
Yeah.
And then you pick another place, and then you have to think about the disasters that could happen in that place. There's no place. You said you have flooding where you are. There's no place that's disaster free. There are some that are less likely to have disasters. There's a statistic that says if you live where it rains, your house can flood. You might not be anywhere near a flood zone, but you could have flooding. You could have earthquakes in areas, tornadoes, ice storms, heat waves, wildfires. There are so many things that kill people that you can't just live scared. But if you have a house a mile from the beach and you saw what happened down in Fort Myers and you go, wow, that person was 8 miles in, they lived on a canal and they had 15 feet of water in their house, that better get your attention. And you need to do something. Maybe you couldn't stop that water. In that case, you wanted to make sure that your possessions were, you got the most valuable things out of there, and you don't stay next time there's a storm. You make sure you get out of there. So if you're going to gamble, have a better plan to at least save your life as a last resort.
But where do you go if you know a hurricane's coming up to Florida up the coast, and it was going to Tampa, and then it suddenly turned and went to Fort Myers and Sanibel Island? What do you do? Like this is a real dilemma, isn't it? When is it too late to go, and where do you go anyway? Because you're gambling. You could be jumping from the fry pan into the fire. It's hard, isn't it?
It is. You can't wait too long. The people that wait till the end are the ones now there's no gas along the way because everybody's already gone, or they're sitting in traffic. I know people that evacuated to Orlando and it took them 6 or 7 hours, as much as 8 hours to get there. That's about an hour and 15 minutes away from Tampa. Some people evacuated to Fort Myers because they thought it was going to go north of there. And then it's like, whoa, now it's coming here. When you live on a peninsula, those are the risks you take. And really the only safe places to evacuate, you might probably want to get up into Alabama or the mountains of Georgia or Tennessee, head over to Texas. I mean, there's a lot of places you can go, but what we did is we stayed and we said, we're going to ride it out. I was joking to a few people, said, I'm going to go down with the ship. Well, now I see maybe I would have, I like to think our house would have held up, but it would have had water in it. And we would be living in absolute chaos right now with your neighbors wiped out, the people all of a sudden have to deal with all this stuff. That's not a very fun life. No,
no, it's not. And even with evacuating, I was just thinking, you saying go to Texas, go to Alabama, go to Georgia, that sort of stuff. But even so, the airports would be absolutely jammed up. The roads would be jammed up. You're in a stressful situation. You can't think straight. You can't plan when you're under stress. So I just think I don't know. I think it's fight, flight, and freeze. It's almost freeze. It's kind of like I don't know what to do. I'm just going to do nothing. I'm just going to bloody cross my fingers and pray my cross and just bloody hope for the best. Hope I survive. That's not
Well, I
you.
used to do a lot of live television, and I'd be out in storms and I'd have to think on my feet because you have to talk, you have to tell people what to do, and your mind has to be working all the time. Now that I don't do that anymore, I found at the most crucial times, I'm just sitting there paralyzed looking at the television going, "Oh, this is not good." The
Mm,
time to make your plan of what you're going to do is now because there's no storm. Maybe hurricane season might be over here, knock on wood, because we're getting some cold fronts moving through here and it could change the weather pattern, but it's still possible through November. But this is the time during the winter and late fall, winter to go, okay, now I'm going to make a plan and this is what I'm going to do. If I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave 3 days early and not wait till the 24-hour evacuation notice. The downside of that is, and it's happened to me when I lived in Texas, when I was on television, telling people what to do. The risk is you tell people to evacuate, and they evacuate for nothing because nothing happens. The next time you tell them, you're like the little boy who cried wolf.
yeah.
They're looking at you going, "You're an idiot. You're wrong. I'm staying." These
Yeah.
guys, people always joke, the weatherman's always wrong. So that's the thing. The bottom line is people need to take evacuations seriously. And
Mm,
if the worst thing that happens to you is you evacuated and you didn't have to, consider yourself lucky.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. When you said it went an 8 mile surge into the peninsula, like would have gone east across the peninsula, did they expect that it was going to go that far, even though they knew that this was a worst case scenario coming? Did they expect that it would go that far?
I don't have actual statistics on where it went. What happened was I posted on my website about my interview with Brock Long, and so people were commenting about their situations. And one woman said her daughter lived on a canal that was 8 miles inland, and her house got all that water. So if there's a surge of water and it's pushing inland, those canals and tributaries, rivers, whatever, the water is going to all get pushed that way. And there was some flooding in this area, and we got very little from the storm. We had some wind damage here in Tampa, but we didn't get a lot of rain. Maybe in my part of South Tampa, maybe a couple inches.
Mm,
Other places got 18 or 20 inches. There are days when we have just a rainstorm where it rains 2 or 3 inches here in South Tampa, and there's flooding
yeah.
because the streets back up. So if you had put 20 inches of water here combined with a storm surge, I think it would have been an incredibly big problem.
Mm, yeah. So when you're saying now, you're debating what do I do about it? Where do I go with this? You're a filmmaker and you've done the last house standing. Have you got thoughts about who am I going to interview? What angle am I going to take? Is there anything I can do? Like, what are your thoughts about moving forward with filmmaking on this subject?
Well, I think I definitely want to make another film about this. You want to give people time to, the last thing they need to do is have a filmmaker trolling around down there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty rough conditions down there, but there is a story to be told. And for me, what interests me as a filmmaker, we can turn on the news and see all the bad things that happen. I want to know what made it. I want to know what we can do going forward that improves our chances of having that not happen to us.
Mm,
So those are the things I think are important for everybody else. But you also hope that it was a wake-up call because it's so close to here. That was the blueprint. That was the, hey, take one. Let's see what it would do to the west coast of Florida. We saw it. So
yeah.
is anything going to change in Tampa? I look forward to interviewing people here, officials here, and seeing what they think. What they had to be watching that and going, "Oh my God, we would have just been destroyed here."
Yeah.
And that's the feeling that you want people to build on and say, okay, what can we do about it? You can't build dunes 20 feet high and block the entire coast. Although if we really cared, if you think $400 billion damage,
Yeah.
maybe there's $1 billion cure that could make it less. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, like the Dutch did with the dikes, they saw the problem and I think they did. That's what history says, whether it's still the case or not. But they built dikes to, exactly for that reason, to stop their cities flooding. So maybe, except it wouldn't be. This is the problem, isn't it? Because you go down to Florida and you go on that west coast there, and the whole draw card is that it's open to the ocean, and it's absolutely beautiful. You start building big bloody walls and suddenly it becomes a prison, and it is a catch-22, isn't it? Do I want to live in a prison safely, or do I want to enjoy what nature brings and take the risk? It's a how the and your podcast, while I'm at it, when you're talking about I want to talk to people about how to do it, your podcast is Make It Better. Tell us how to make it better. So I like the fact that you're going to ask those questions. I don't know that you're how hopeful are you that you're going to get all the answers?
If you get people talking about it, you hope somebody's smart enough to have the answers. You couldn't put just a big canal lock out there, though, you would think, because there's a big opening at Tampa Bay where the Skyway Bridge is, but then there's openings other places, and all along the coast of St. Pete, it's all sea level, so that you really couldn't keep all that water out. And when you talk about, you don't want to turn it into a prison, statistically, prisons are safer than most people's houses.
Yeah.
We talked about that in the last house standing. Aris Papadopoulos had this quote where he said the level category of building of a prison, I think, is a level 4 or 3. Homes are 2. So the higher you get, the White House, I think, is a 5. The higher you get, the safer you are. Prisons are rated safer structures than houses. So we would have been safer in a prison.
Yeah, but not much not much fun. That's the thing, you're safe, but you haven't got the life. It is a catch-22, and it's like we're up here where we've got all the bushfires. Like all of this area was wiped out just a little bit further back than here, and people are still building in the same place, and you ask them why, and they say, because this is my home. This is what I love. I know another bushfire can come, but this is where I love. And it is a fine line between living a life that you love and understanding there's a risk, and living a life of fear, but you're safe. So I think, I don't know, as humans, I don't think we can get that right. I think it's such a juggling act to work out what's the most important thing to us. And do we want to live our lives in fear? But then what can we put in place to make it as safe as possible so that we can still enjoy what we have?
Absolutely. You don't want to be paralyzed by fear, but you also want to make smart decisions. There are some countries that when an area gets leveled by something bad, people aren't allowed to rebuild there. That area is now deemed unlivable. Or if you're going to live there, you should at least rebuild it to survive the level of storm that just wiped it out. And Mexico Beach, to me, is such a great example of that. Such a beautiful little community. They were hit by a Category 5 hurricane, but when they changed the building code, they raised the wind rating for what structures had to be from 130 to 140 miles an hour. Well, again, they were hit by a Category 5 hurricane with storm surge. So if that same storm hit them again, the standard they rebuilt to conceivably wouldn't be enough to save them. And so I think we have to analyze what the choices everybody makes. I don't want the government telling me where I can live. But then when my house is destroyed, I shouldn't be able to run to them and say, save me. That to me is the dilemma. It's like, I want to do what I want, but if it doesn't work out, I know you're going to come cover my ass.
Yeah.
That's where it gets a little dicey.
Yeah. And what would it cost, like, to build a house that would withstand that? How much extra would that be? Like a house that's not and a house that is, what's the difference in building costs?
I've heard maybe 25% more, but the cost that nobody really gives you is they calculate what your life is like if that house gets destroyed.
Yeah.
So if I was building $1 million house and you said to me, okay, but it's going to cost you $1,250,000 for that house to survive. Now go back to that $1 million house and say, okay, what happens when my house is destroyed? Where am I displaced for living? What is my kids going to go to school? Where are we going to put all the stuff that's lost and damaged? All the years we're going to spend rebuilding our lives. All of a sudden, $250,000 is a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
So that's what I think needs to be calculated. I think builders, if I had to pick a villain in my story, I blame the construction industry. And when I've talked to people in the construction industry, they say, well, we can't do all that stuff to a house because nobody will pay for it. Well, that's the same how airbags were in cars. The auto industry didn't want to do it. They were told they had to do it. Yeah. And now they do it, and it's accepted. So why are we not building safe houses? I just don't understand it. And not only do we not build safe houses, there's a lot of crappy builders out there that build houses that are garbage.
Mm.
And there's great builders. There's builders that probably build houses that are fortresses or beautiful houses, but there's so many that don't. Can you imagine if they were in any other field and you could have such a expensive purchase that's so easily obliterated,
Mm.
and you get to call it a business and keep making money at it? I
Yeah.
think that's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, that stinks. I don't think 25% is much. Like I don't, as much as nobody wants to pay it. Nobody wants to pay any more than they have to pay for anything. But if it's going to save your life and it's going to save you all that stress, I think 25% is actually a small cost to pay. But then, how do you know which builders? Like, is there anything that? So let's say you get a house built, and the builder says, and it's a dodgy builder, and they say, yeah, we've done it to Category 5 rating, and then it blows down. I mean, how does over there in? I don't even know how it works in Australia, but in America, how does it? What chance has the person got of recouping their money from that dodgy builder if the house blows down?
Well, what the dodgy builder will do is go back, file bankruptcy, and open their business the next week with a different name. And
Wow.
it's not regulated enough. The builders have a lobbying industry that works to keep building codes as low as possible. Building codes should be as high as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Why are we allowing people to build it? When they changed the building code in Moore, Oklahoma, after 8 tornadoes, 4 major tornadoes, which we talked about in the last house standing, it actually saved a lot of structures when they had tornadoes going forward, because they did things that made a difference and made those houses safer. That should be the standard. And if somebody's going to build, okay, how do we make them do it? Maybe things like Zillow, Realtor.com, all those websites have to reward good building. If a house has a 5-star building rating, it should be worth more than the tract home next to it that did it to the minimum. That to me is an absolute no-brainer. And one of the things Brock Long said, he goes, we should be building to a code that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Code should be forward thinking.
Yeah.
Look at what just happened. Now let's change the code. I don't care if it cripples the industry short term, if it saves lives. We can't keep having hundreds of billions of dollars in disasters year after year. It's just the whole system would fall apart. Why do we keep making the same mistakes again? So you're hitting your thumb with a hammer. You go, I'm going to keep doing this. Doesn't hurt enough yet. It just doesn't hurt enough yet. This one should get people's attention, but so should the last one, and so should the one before that. I mean, there's been a lot of disasters over the years, and maybe things have gotten a little better, but all you have to do is look at all that damage, and it gives you a good example of it. It's not that much better.
Yeah, and I think the thing is with politics too is that nobody wants to do that because they're only in for a short period of time, and it'll take longer than that to change the code, and therefore they're not going to get credit for it. And it's just a bloody ridiculous little game they play. Who's that? Who's Brock Long? You keep talking about him. What does he do?
He used to be the administrator of FEMA. So he ran FEMA for a while under the Trump administration, and we got in to interview him in our first film, and I got him on my podcast last week. And he just had so many interesting things to say. I also had a guy named John Scardina and Aris Papadopoulos that are in the disaster and resilience fields. And these guys are so knowledgeable about, disasters and what people should do and planning and all this stuff. So there's a lot of really smart people out there, but are they being heard, and are changes being made? I mean, Brock has a lot of ideas of how, or things that we should be building better. We should, we could send a rocket up to deflect an asteroid 7 million miles away. We can't build a house that doesn't blow down.
Yeah.
I think our priority is that's an important thing, but there are things we spend a lot of money on. Come on, there's more important stuff we could be doing with it.
Yeah. And so what is FEMA? I'm only trying to help the Aussies out here.
What's that?
I said, what's FEMA? I'm only trying to help the Aussies out here.
Well, FEMA is a government organization that oversees, disasters. And so FEMA pulls up after the disaster and helps provide certain things for people and certain services, and coordinates relief efforts and all these different or search efforts and all the stuff after a storm. So they do a lot of things, but they're also highly criticized, and it's very political here about who's running it and who's doing what. And it's very easy. I think it's a thankless job. You come in after a disaster and you're supposed to get people bridge loans and temporary housing and help coordinate all that. there's no way that goes well, even if it goes
Yeah.
well, because people's lives are shattered. So no, they're not going to be happy with anything.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them. That's a frustrating, horrible situation to be in. That's got to be just hell for those people. So FEMA is starting at the behind the eight ball from the very beginning.
Yeah.
But there's also things that they do that are important. They're just, it's probably overwhelming for them, the amount of disasters. I think Brock said he had over 200 disasters in his time there that he had to deal with, including the Paradise, California fire, which just destroyed an entire community. So there was endless amounts of things that go wrong. So you're very rarely called out for a parade and a nice day. It's usually something bad happened.
Kind of makes you wonder why people would have those jobs, doesn't it? Oh, I'm going to take a job where everyone's angry with me. But, we do need those people, and we do need it. But, I can't imagine going to work every single day and everybody's cranky with you.
It's a thankless job. And, I hear all the criticism towards them. I was surprised we got in to interview them for our film. I think the only reason that we did was because we were talking about being more proactive. We had no angle to bash them. Yeah. And, I'll let other people do that. I think they do have a very tough job, and there's things that they do well, and then there's things that they can do better. But you could say that about anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you got any stories? Like, have you got any anything that's really touched your, really, like, just to give, because as you say, the storm passes, people forget about it, and we see it from here. So all around the world, when there's something going on in another country, you see the immediate 24 hours of it, and then you see it trails off, and then we forget about it. Like you said before, we move on to the next thing, and then the next thing. And same with the Ukraine war. It's up there for 2 weeks, and then suddenly we don't care about Ukraine anymore. I do. Most people do. But, the news doesn't want to bloody think that we care anymore. So we're not seeing the true impact. We just saw what the media wants us to see. What have you seen on the ground or heard on the ground that is helpful for listeners to know? Just so we
to know that there's the ongoing hell continues there. You see, we're on this website for Sanibel Island, and there's all the places that we used to go there that now you're seeing images of. So you see the supermarket that you went to, the restaurant that you'd love to go to, the nature preserve that was just incredible to drive through, the shell museum that was spectacular, the wild birds, the parakeets that lived out, not wild, they were domesticated, outside this supermarket in the strip mall area. There were these beautiful birds that a lot of them apparently died in the storm. And it's just hearing the tragedies that are starting to come out of people's businesses destroyed, and then you hear the hopeful thing about we're going to rebuild, we're going to get this back. But that's a long road to recovery. In a tourist area, you have to rebuild everything, and then you have to get the tourists back. Now, I know that there's so many people that love that area that as soon as something's open, people are going to want to go and support them. But the news media does move on. The next disaster, this is in the rearview mirror, and nobody's going to think about it. A lot of people probably forgot about Mexico Beach. But because Floridians know what they're going through, hopefully that keeps it going, where people continue to provide support. I know we donated a bunch of things, and we try to get as involved as we can in giving things, but there are people that do a lot more than we do, and they're doing it on a regular basis, driving stuff down there, going down and helping them clean up. So there's a lot of heroes, first responders, that you hear stories of how they went and risked their lives to save people, and now they're working to get power back on, plucking people off of roofs. There's so many stories. I mean, we want to bash bad things that happen, but disasters bring out the good and the bad. The vermin that want to rip people off, that happens every time. But there's so many good people, from first responders to law enforcement, and all these people firefighters that are going out there and making a difference. The guys men and women that restore power, the utility poles, and those trucks that go out there and do all that hard work. And those people are to be applauded, and hopefully they continue to do their job, and things somewhat get back to normal there, but it's going to be a long time.
When this goes to air, I'll be in Tampa, but the week before that, which we're not there yet because this is pre-recorded, I'll be in Michigan, in Detroit, and in Brighton, but talking about, and I'm talking at a hero conference, which is Hero Roundtable. And I'm speaking about, but by the time this goes live, I'll have already done this talk, but I'm speaking about heroic action. And when you're saying there, that there's a lot of people go to, they're being heroes in a sense. I'm going to come down, I'm going to give you this, and I'm going to do that. And so they've got this heroic behavior going on. And the talk I'm going to do is about that's impulsive behavior, impulsive heroism or accidental heroism after the case. And a lot of people say they will do something in an emergency and they don't, but my talk is about also considering planned heroism. And so heroes don't have to have capes and bloody masks and everything else. But when we're talking about the government changing the building codes and setting up a situation where we don't have to respond to disaster, that's planned heroism. Where they actually put things in place, actively take action to prevent disasters, so that these accidental heroes or don't have to, or impulsive heroes, after the fact, don't have to keep showing up all the time because somebody took heroic action in the first place, to prevent something happening. And my talk's not going to change the bloody government, but I think a lot about this is that it takes less effort, less stress, less trauma to do something heroically in the first place to prevent something than it does to show up in the middle of the trauma, and try to be helped, because you haven't got a rational brain when you're turning up in the middle of the trauma, but you have prior to it. So it intrigues me why we constantly wait for disaster. It intrigues me.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. And I don't understand why the insurance industry, the building industry, why can't all those people get together and say, okay, look, let's do this for the greater good.
Yeah.
We have the ability to do this better. Why don't we do it? But unfortunately, everything is so political. So one side's going to, if one side wants it, the other side's not going to want it just because that side wants it.
Yeah.
And it's sadly, we need to start electing people that don't just care about one little faction. They care about everybody and truly want to do something to make a difference. And I don't know that we're going to see that. I don't know that's going to happen anytime soon. So you have to hope for those individual acts of heroism. I want to see a builder step up and say, I'm only building houses to the South Florida standard, 175 miles an hour. If it's on the water, I'm only building it if it's elevated 15 feet with stilts going, with steel going into the ground. And they have a standard, and they say, if you want to build that house that's going to wash away, call Phil over there. Let him do it. That would be a hero. That would be somebody that says, I want to make a difference. I'm not going to be responsible for being part of the problem. I don't know that will ever happen, but we can certainly dream about it.
I think it could happen, but it's all attached to that scarcity mindset. Because right now I'm building 100 houses a year, and if I go and tighten that up and say I'm only building these special ones, I may only get 4 houses a year. Therefore, I'm not prepared to go backwards in my income to do that. However, what people don't say, we're always such short-term thinkers, because once they build that 4, then another 7 will go, gee, I want them. And then another 20 will go, gee, I want that. And within 5 years, that business is a leader and a booming leader. But it's just that scarcity mindset to if we could just put that aside and say, well, I care about something beyond myself. I've got enough. I just want to do beyond myself. Eventually you become a leader and you become a champion. You become wealthy, and whether that's financially wealthy or spiritually wealthy or whatever, you're changing the world. I think there's nothing better than stepping into that space and making a better world. I wish I could teach that to everybody.
Take me to that place. I want to go there. Sounds like a great place. Where is that?
Well, it can happen. It does happen. There are people who do it, and it's such a shame that anyway, you and I could talk about this forever, but now you talk about your subtitle to your film or last film is Hope is Not a Strategy.
Exactly.
Do you think that hope was the strategy in this case, and now post hurricane, do you think they're still just going to go back to hope is the best strategy?
I do. Sadly, I do. This is a hard place to leave. it does happen when a disaster hits an area. Some people just can't afford to stay there. Maybe the people that have means are rebuilding first, but the people that needed jobs, the laborers in that area, the people that were the waiters, the waitresses, the people working in the supermarket, they've got to survive. So they have to go other places. They might have to move away. So I think if you're living on the west coast of Florida, I think you're living with a degree of hope that you hope that hurricane is never going to hit you. And this has now happened someplace that most people have been and know about. So it's a terrible strategy. And that's the thing I think will be interesting for a film also is, was it worth it? Was it worth the risk of what happened? In our last film, the people I interviewed that lost everything, I don't know that it was worth it to them. It's a very difficult process to have to go through. And I don't know that anybody would ever choose that, but you kind of are making that choice when you stay and haven't done everything to make yourself as safe as possible. So now your strategy is hope, because you did not do the preparation.
Yeah. Now, before you talked about climate change and people pointing fingers and everything and saying, see, that's climate change, which I agree, there's no point doing that. However, climate change is a big problem, and we're not addressing it quick enough. But do you think natural disasters are getting worse because of climate change? Or at least that's playing a
you can make that argument. You can make two arguments there. One, you could look at statistics, and when I talk to experts on climate change that study this stuff, they all say the climate change has an effect on these things. And then you'll talk to other people and they'll say, but we're also building much more things in those dangerous areas. So naturally, we're going to have more things destroyed. So again, you're having a simple premise of what can we do to make this better? And then you get two different arguments. Well, we have to cut down carbon emissions. We have to do all these things to stop it. Or we have to build better, or we have to live in safer areas further from the water. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach that. That's not a simple answer to a question. And even if we all agree that climate change is the worst thing in the world and we have to do something about it, it's not a quick fix.
No.
The best example, California, which I think is probably the most messed up state in the country, they talked about how everybody has to have electric cars by a certain year. I don't know if it was 2030 or whatever. Well, they had a heat wave this summer, and the first thing they did was ask people to stop charging their cars. So in a state where everybody has to drive to get anywhere, and if everybody had an electric car, nobody would go anywhere. I mean, so solutions aren't even that well thought out, because if those are the ones you're literally pulling the plug on in a heat wave, what's the point?
I agree. I don't know enough about the whole electric car thing, and I know that we've got a rule over here. It's going to be, I think it's it's about 10 years that they want all the petrol and all the gasoline cars off the road, and I can see that. Yeah, that's great. But I'm still thinking, well, hang on, we're still using electricity until we transition to a different form of electricity. We're still just buggering up. Now, I'm speaking as an uneducated person. I actually haven't done my done my research on this. But I also think about where we have the charging stations for electric cars. They're right down the back blocks in dingy, dark places that if a single female, in their 20s is driving an electric car, she's got to go right down to way down to this back dock to charge her car. And then it's that there are so many things that are not quite right. And I think I agree with you. They've got to get, when the problem is they react to everything. This is one thing I've noticed with everything in life, is that there's such a reaction. We'll react to this and we'll react to that and react to this. But they haven't done the long-term thinking. Same with our freeways. They react to it being clogged up, so they build one more lane. But in 10 years' time, they've got to build another lane because they didn't think about that. And now there's forever roadworks on the freeways because nobody thinks ahead. It's a really difficult situation. I don't have the answers. This isn't my sandpit. You think about it far more than I do. But it's I think that. This is my personal opinion. I think that it's not easy. I think that there's going to be both sides of the argument everywhere, if not 5 to 10 sides of the argument, buying in on it. But my belief is if we don't work together and lay our arms down, and stop fighting for what we want and start listening. If we start listening to what everybody wants and start listening to it with reason, with a reasonable mind and a rational mind about what everybody's putting forward, then maybe together we can come up with solutions that will be sustainable.
You should add that to that perfect world you're creating.
I'm going to create it, George.
That should be the working mantra of your perfect universe that you're working on. And it all sounds great. Hey, you're preaching to the choir. I'm on board. Sign me up. The problem is when you do that here, people just so polarize. I know Republicans that won't even give you a second serious thought about climate change. And I know Democrats that think if you don't solve climate change, the world's going to come to an end in 5 years. And the people that were screaming, there were people right after the hurricane that were blaming the governor for, with the things he doesn't do for climate change for that storm. But what they didn't say is, wow, this has been one of the lowest hurricane total year we've had in years. I mean, we've had 2 that have effectively threatened the United States the entire season. So there's 2 sides, or like you say, multiple sides to every argument. There's no right answer, but we have to get reasonable people to sit down and find common ground where we can have a conversation. Unfortunately, in this country, 2 sides can't even sit down and talk about it because they're too worried about trying to dust each other up and get their talking points and getting on the news and looking like they're really tough. Meanwhile, all of us are screwed.
Yeah. I think that's the same everywhere. Australia doesn't seem to be quite as bad as America as far as politics goes, but I tell you what, there's still some bloody jerks in there, and I don't think it's the government that's going to solve it. Actually, I think it's the people, and I think I'm going to change the name of my podcast from "Get Off the Bench" to "The Perfect World."
I like that. I like that. I'll listen.
Oh, look, it makes me cross because it's not actually hard. It's not hard to work together, and yet it seems to be one of the hardest bloody things that humans struggle with. It's if we were just decent freaking human beings, and everybody says they're decent. Everybody says, yeah, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. If we were all bloody decent, good people, we'd all sit down and actually respect each other and listen to views, and we'd work together with the understanding that this planet we've only got one. There's no planet B. We're all going to have kids. There's all going to be like generations to follow us. Why the hell can't we all have that value in common? It frustrates the shit out of me, George.
I don't blame you. I had a podcast guest on, this guy named Doug Hughes, sometime last year, who was the guy who landed a gyrocopter on the Capitol lawn, delivering a letter to all the Congress people saying, we have to get big money out of politics. And, some people think he's a little crazy, but a lot of what he says makes sense. Big money drives things in politics. If we could find a way, all these politicians that are allegedly doing stuff for our good, they all get in office and they all tend to leave either rich or they get really good jobs where they then get rich.
Yep.
And you could point to any of them probably on either side. I saw this thing about all the money that somebody like Nancy Pelosi and her husband have made. They're getting insider tips. Somebody's telling them. And on the right, you could probably find just as many stories of people that have just compounded their wealth on our dime. And so, no matter what your political beliefs are, we need to have people that care about us and don't care about themselves. So why do these people get rich? Maybe they have to be true public servants. They're not allowed to do a lot of the things. And that's what Doug was advocating. They're not allowed to become lobbyists. They're not allowed to become consultants for companies right after they leave Congress, because, that's where they're getting a lot of the money from. Why don't we have these rules in place? Because the people that make those rules are the people that are getting rich.
Exactly.
It's like asking your kids to make up the rules. Hey, kids, you decide how we're going to do stuff.
Yeah.
That's not going to go well.
Well, they behave like kids. So, I think that comes back to that, there was all that talk. There's a blue side and the red side. And I think we just need the purple side, and just the purple gang just bloody fix the world. But anyway, you and I can toss this up for money. I reckon we could do this for 10 years and nothing will still change. But anyway.
That's true.
Well, George, I've absolutely loved this. I love chatting with you. I absolutely love it. And thank you for sharing. Like, we can talk about Hurricane Ian, but we weren't there. You were there, and you're well close enough. And it's I think it's really relevant to hear from somebody, in amongst that. So where can people find you to follow your podcast and your website and all that?
Well, my podcast is called Tell Us How to Make It Better, and the website is tellushowtomakeitbetter.com. I would encourage everybody who's curious about hurricanes to listen to the Brock Long and the Aris and John Scardina podcast. I think it's 53 and 54 are the two that are on there, because I think you'll get a lot of great information. And there's other podcasts on there that I hope that you find interesting, including one with the famous and talented Karen Vaughn that we did last year. You were a great guest on my podcast. And then my film is called The Last House Standing. If you go to thelasthousestanding.org, you can actually watch the film on there. It costs $3.99. And what I'm trying to do is coordinate with a lot of people that have big lists, but this takes a lot of time to make this work, where I could say, look, let's make this film available to people. Let's encourage them to see it. And we'll give 100% of the money that we make to the people in Southwest Florida. Let's donate that money, because the most important thing is that people see the film. I'm not going to get rich on people seeing the film. I'll get rich feeling good that the film actually did what we made it for.
Yeah.
And so that's all that I want to get out of it. But for other people, it would be great if we could do some good with it. So I'm working on that as well. But, nothing happens quickly. But they go to thelasthousestanding.org.
Yeah. I'll put all these links in the show notes because you've got other stuff as well. But when you're talking about doing a screening and sending all the money to Southwest Florida, how much longer are they going to be wanting donations for?
I think that's an ongoing thing. I think that's going to be going on for months and years, because people don't truly calculate all the things that need to be done.
Yeah.
Right now it's immediate things: finding people housing, finding people have lost clothes, they've lost, all their possessions, they've lost cars. So it's really a daunting task. And what happens is once the spotlight leaves, these people end up, struggling even more. So I think anything that anybody can come up with to help them, you just can't rely on government bailing people out. But there's so many generous people that are donating a lot of money to help them, or they're donating a lot of resources, and we love to see that continue and applaud anybody's efforts.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I hope you do get that set up, because that would be really. So now you're on a wing and a promise. You're going to have to get it set up. Now you've mentioned it.
Hey, you say it, then you have to mean it. If don't say it unless you mean it. I would start it right now. How many people are on your list? We could set something up, you and me, and you just say, hey, if 1,000 of you go to watch it, we can make a 4,500, whatever the amount is, because the place that the film is hosted takes their cut for hosting the film. But the rest of it we could give away. So I'll do that with anybody. I asked a lady the other day who has 25 or 30,000 people on a list that she could reach out to. Hey, all you can do is try, right?
I don't have anywhere near that number, so we might make about $200. But anyway, that gives food to someone for a week. So.
Absolutely. And Karen, when you get to town, you better call me.
I'm going to. I'll organize it before that. Yeah, we'll.
Awesome.
I can't wait. And so by the time everyone hears this, we'll have already had dinner. So, and wasn't it lovely, George?
I would love it. Maybe I'll record it and put it in my podcast. But I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I would love. I look forward to us getting together in person.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and I will catch up with you in a couple of weeks, which will have already been last week. And fantastic. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks heaps, George.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, see ya.